The hammer slipped from Lucas Quinn's calloused hand and clattered against the wooden shingles, nearly tumbling off the slanted roof before he caught it with reflexes honed by 28 years of frontier living. Josephine Sterling heard the sound from the dusty road below and looked up, shielding her eyes against the brutal August sun of 1882, to see a lone figure perched atop the skeletal frame of what would become Black Hawk's new schoolhouse. The Colorado mining town had been promised this building for 3 years, yet here was this man, working entirely by himself on a Saturday afternoon when the rest of the prospectors were drinking away their week's earnings at the saloon. She had arrived in Black Hawk just 2 days prior, stepping off the stagecoach with nothing but a worn leather satchel and a teaching certificate from a Boston academy that seemed increasingly worthless the farther west she traveled. At 23, Josephine had imagined adventure and purpose awaiting her in Colorado, not the ramshackle collection of buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles on a ship's hull. The town had grown rapidly after gold discoveries in the area, but civilization seemed to have arrived more slowly than the miners. "You should not be up there alone," Josephine called out, her proper Boston accent cutting through the thin mountain air. "That looks dangerous." Lucas paused mid-swing, hammer raised above his head, and looked down at the woman addressing him. Even from this distance, he could see she was out of place here, dressed in a traveling suit that had once been fine, but now bore the dust of hard journeys. Her dark hair was pinned up in an elaborate style that would wilt in this climate within days. He set down the hammer and wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Dangerous is a relative term out here, miss," he replied, his voice carrying the slight drawl of someone who had spent time in Texas before drifting north. "This roof is not going to build itself, and the children need somewhere to learn come September." Josephine felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. "I am the new teacher, Josephine Sterling. I was told the schoolhouse would be ready when I arrived." Lucas descended the ladder with practiced ease, his boots finding each rung without looking. Up close, Josephine could see he was younger than she had initially thought, though hard work had carved lines around his blue eyes. He was tall and lean, with sandy hair that touched his collar and hands that told stories of labor. There was something gentle in his expression, despite the roughness of his appearance. "Lucas Quinn," he said, extending his hand before remembering it was covered in dirt and splinters. He withdrew it sheepishly. "I apologize for the state of things. The town council approved funds for the schoolhouse 8 months ago, but the contractors they hired took the money and disappeared toward Denver. I have been working on it in my spare time." "By yourself?" Josephine looked at the structure with new eyes. The frame was solid, the walls were rising straight and true, and the foundation looked professionally laid. "This is exceptional work for one man. I learned carpentry from my father back in Missouri. He always said a man who could build was never without purpose." Lucas picked up a canteen from the shade and offered it to her. "You look like you could use some water. The altitude here takes some adjustment." Josephine accepted gratefully, suddenly aware of the tightness in her chest and the pounding in her temples. "I confess I am finding Colorado rather overwhelming. Everything seems so vast and uncertain." "That is what makes it home to some of us," Lucas said, a hint of a smile crossing his features. "The uncertainty means possibility. Where are you staying?" "Miss Sterling?" "At the boarding house run by Mrs. Henderson. She has been kind enough to offer me a room until I find more permanent lodging." Lucas nodded. "Abigail Henderson is good people. She will look after you." He glanced at the sun, measuring the remaining daylight. "I should get back to work if I want to finish this section before dark. But if you would like, I could show you around the schoolhouse, let you see what your classroom will look like." There was something in his invitation that went beyond mere politeness. Josephine recognized the loneliness of someone who spent too much time working alone, who welcomed conversation even with a stranger. She recognized it because she felt the same ache herself. "I would like that very much," she said. Lucas led her through the front entrance, ducking slightly to avoid a beam that was not yet fully secured. Inside, the space was larger than it appeared from outside. Rough wooden floors had been laid and sanded smooth. Windows framed views of the mountains that surrounded the town on all sides, their peaks still holding patches of snow even in summer. "I thought natural light would be important for reading," Lucas explained, gesturing to the generous window placement. "And I am building shelves along that wall for books if the town ever gets funding for a proper library. There will be a stove in the corner for winter, with a chimney that draws properly so the room does not fill with smoke. Josephine walked slowly through the space, her footsteps echoing. She could already imagine rows of desks, children's voices, the smell of chalk and paper. But more than that, she could see the care that had gone into every detail. The windows were positioned to avoid glare. The ceiling was higher than necessary, giving the room an airy feeling. There was even a small alcove that would serve perfectly as a cloakroom. "You have thought of everything," she said softly. "This is not just a building. You are creating something meaningful." Lucas looked uncomfortable with the praise, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I just want it done right. Too many things out here are thrown together hastily, built to last a season before falling apart. If I am going to build something, it should endure. How long have you been in Black Hawk?" 4 years. I came during the first rush, thinking I would strike gold like everyone else." He laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. "Turned out I am a terrible prospector, but the town needed builders, and I found I was happier with a hammer in my hand than a pickaxe." "Do you have family here?" Josephine asked, then immediately regretted the forward question. "Forgive me. That is none of my business." "It is a fair question in a town this small. Everyone knows everyone else's story, whether they want to or not." Lucas walked to one of the windows and looked out at the mountains. "My parents died of fever when I was 19. I have a sister in St. Louis, married with children. We write occasionally. What about you, Miss Sterling? What brings a Boston teacher to Colorado?" Josephine joined him at the window, careful to maintain a proper distance. "Stubbornness, perhaps, or the desire to prove I could do something important. My father wanted me to marry a banker's son and settle into a comfortable life of tea parties and charity work. I wanted more than that. And you thought teaching mining children in the Rockies would be more fulfilling. I thought anywhere would be better than a gilded cage." She turned to face him. "I wanted to go somewhere I could make a real difference, where people needed what I could offer, even if it meant leaving behind everything familiar." Lucas studied her for a long moment, and Josephine felt her breath catch slightly under the intensity of his gaze. There was intelligence in his eyes, and something else she could not quite name. "You might find Black Hawk tougher than you expect," he said finally. "The children here are not like Boston students. Many of them work in the mines or help their families pan for gold. They have seen hard things, lived through harder times. Some cannot read or write their own names." "Then they need a teacher all the more," Josephine replied with determination. "I did not come here expecting it to be easy, Mr. Quinn. I came here to teach, and that is exactly what I intend to do." A genuine smile broke across Lucas's face, transforming his serious features. "I believe you will do just fine, Miss Sterling, and please, call me Lucas. We do not stand much on formality out here." "Then you must call me Josephine." They stood there in the unfinished schoolhouse as afternoon shadows lengthened across the mountains, two strangers finding unexpected common ground. Josephine felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the anxiety that had gripped her since leaving Boston. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, she felt the stirring of hope. "I should let you return to your work," she said reluctantly. "But would it be acceptable if I visited again? I would like to see the progress, perhaps help if there is anything I can do." Lucas looked surprised. "A lady like yourself would not want to be doing construction work." "A lady like myself crossed half a continent alone to teach in a mining town," Josephine countered. "I suspect I am more capable than you assume." That earned another smile. "Fair enough, I would welcome the company, and the help, if you are serious about the offer." "I am completely serious." As Josephine walked back toward the boarding house, she found herself glancing back at the schoolhouse. Lucas had already climbed back onto the roof and was working again, his movements efficient and sure. There was something compelling about watching him work, about seeing someone so completely absorbed in creating something of value. That night, lying in her narrow bed at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, Josephine thought about the schoolhouse and the man building it. She had expected to find teaching in the West a lonely endeavor, but perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps there were others here who understood the desire to build something lasting, something meaningful. The next morning was Sunday, and Josephine discovered that Black Hawk had a small church perched on a hillside overlooking the main street. She attended the service, sitting in the back and observing the congregation. There were families who looked like they had been in Colorado for generations, weathered and tough. There were recent arrivals like herself, still dressed in clothes more suited to city life. And there were minors, their hands permanently stained from their work, sitting uneasily in the wooden pews. Lucas was not among them, she noted with a small pang of disappointment. After the service, Mrs. Henderson introduced Josephine to what felt like half the town. There was Samuel Garrett, who ran the general store, and his wife Martha. There was Dr. Raymond Pierce, an elderly man who served the entire mining district. There were the Patterson family, the Coopers, the Mitchells. Names and faces blurred together until Josephine's head spun. "You will learn them all eventually," Mrs. Henderson assured her. She was a stout woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Black Hawk may be growing, but it is still small enough that everyone matters. Speaking of which, you have met our Mr. Quinn?" "I have," Josephine said carefully. "He was working on the schoolhouse yesterday." "That boy," Mrs. Henderson shook her head with affection. "Works himself to the bone, he does. Every spare moment on that building, and refuses to accept a penny for the labor. Says it is his contribution to the town. That is remarkably generous." "Lucas Quinn is one of the finest men in Black Hawk," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "Quiet, keeps to himself mostly. But there is not a person here he has not helped at some point. When the Johnsons lost their cabin to a fire last winter, Lucas spent 2 weeks rebuilding it. When old Mr. Chen broke his leg, Lucas made sure his claim was worked so he would not lose it. He is the kind of man this territory needs more of." Josephine felt warmth spread through her chest at this description. She had sensed Lucas's character yesterday, but hearing it confirmed by someone who knew him well made her previous impression feel more solid. Monday morning found her restless. The school would not open for another 3 weeks, and she had little to do except familiarize herself with the town and prepare lesson plans. By noon, she found her feet carrying her back toward the schoolhouse. Lucas was there, as she had somehow known he would be. Today he was working on the interior, installing the bookshelves he had mentioned. He looked up in surprise when she entered. "You came back," he said, stating the obvious. "I told you I would, and I meant what I said about helping." Josephine had dressed more practically today, in a simple cotton dress and sturdy boots purchased from Garrett's store that morning. "Put me to work." Lucas looked uncertain. "I would not want you to injure yourself. I am stronger than I look, and I am a quick learner." She crossed her arms. "You cannot complete this building alone before September, can you?" "Probably not," he admitted. "There is still the roof to finish, all the interior work, the desks to build." "Then you need help, so please tell me what to do." For a moment, Lucas seemed to struggle with some internal debate. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. Can you sand wood? Show me how, and I can." He handed her a piece of sandpaper and demonstrated the proper motion, his hands moving in smooth, even strokes across a length of pine. Josephine watched carefully, then began working on her own board. The motion was repetitive and made her arms ache within minutes, but there was something satisfying about watching the rough wood become smooth under her efforts. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the scratch of sandpaper and the occasional call of a bird outside. Finally, Lucas spoke. "Why did you really come west, Josephine?" She continued sanding, considering the question. "I suppose I wanted to matter. In Boston, I was just another young woman expected to marry well and fade into the background. My thoughts, my education, none of it mattered because I was not a man. Out here, I thought perhaps things would be different. Are they? I do not know yet. Ask me again in a few months." She glanced at him. "What about you? You said you came for gold but stayed for carpentry, but that does not explain why you care so much about this schoolhouse." Lucas set down the board he was working on and leaned against the wall. "When I was a boy in Missouri, we had a teacher named Mr. Whitman. He was the only person who saw something in me beyond farm work and following in my father's footsteps. He taught me to read properly, lent me books, showed me there was a bigger world than the one I knew. I might never have learned carpentry if he had not encouraged me to pursue what I loved rather than what was expected. He sounds like a wonderful teacher. He was. He died when I was 15, pneumonia. The town never replaced him, said they could not afford it. The school building fell apart from neglect." Lucas's voice grew quiet. "I used to walk past it and think what a waste it was. All that potential, just rotting away because no one cared enough to maintain it." Josephine understood then. "You are not just building a schoolhouse. You are honoring him, and making sure what happened in my town does not happen here. These children deserve better. They deserve someone like you who cares enough to travel across the country to teach them, and they deserve a proper building to learn in." The raw honesty in his words made Josephine's throat tighten. She set down her sandpaper and walked over to where Lucas stood. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing the value in what I am trying to do, and for creating a space where I can do it." Lucas met her eyes, and the air between them seemed to thicken. For a breathless moment, Josephine thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should keep working. Daylight is wasting." They fell back into their tasks, but something had shifted. The silence now felt charged with unspoken thoughts. Josephine found herself hyper-aware of Lucas's presence, of the way his shoulders moved as he worked, of the small furrow of concentration between his brows. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Each morning, Josephine would arrive at the schoolhouse to find Lucas already at work. They would labor side by side until the heat of midday forced them to take breaks in the shade. Lucas taught her to saw straight lines, to drive nails without bending them, to measure twice before cutting. In turn, Josephine shared her plans for the school, describing the lessons she wanted to teach and the books she hoped to acquire. "I want to teach more than just reading and arithmetic," she explained one afternoon as they ate a simple lunch of bread and cheese. "I want to teach these children about the world beyond Black Hawk, about history and science and literature. I want to give them choices." "That is ambitious," Lucas said, but his tone was approving. "Many folks around here think education beyond the basics is a waste of time for mining families. Those folks are wrong. Every child deserves the chance to reach their full potential, regardless of their background." "You really believe that, do not you?" He looked at her with something like wonder. "You are not just here for adventure or to escape Boston. You genuinely care." "Of course I care. Why else would I be here?" Lucas shook his head slowly. "You would be surprised how many people do things for the wrong reasons. It is refreshing to meet someone with real conviction." As the days passed, Josephine found herself thinking about Lucas at odd moments. When she woke in the morning, she looked forward to seeing him. When she returned to the boarding house in the evening, she found herself recounting their conversations, analyzing every word and gesture. She told herself it was simply because he was the first real friend she had made in Black Hawk, but her racing pulse when he smiled suggested something deeper. Mrs. Henderson noticed, of course. "You are spending a great deal of time at that schoolhouse," she remarked one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "There is much work to be done," Josephine replied, trying to sound casual. And Lucas Quinn is very handsome when he is working, is he not?" Josephine felt her cheeks flame. "Mrs. Henderson?" The older woman laughed. "I may be old, dear, but I am not blind, and neither is the rest of this town. People are starting to talk about you two." "There is nothing to talk about. We are simply working together to finish the school." "If you say so?" Mrs. Henderson's tone suggested she did not believe a word of it. "But for what it is worth, Lucas is a good man. If something were to develop between you, you could do far worse." "I came to Black Hawk to teach, not to find a husband," Josephine protested. "Who says you cannot do both?" Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. "Love has a way of finding us when we least expect it, child, and sometimes in the least likely places." That night, Josephine lay awake thinking about the older woman's words. Was she developing feelings for Lucas? The question seemed both absurd and obvious. She barely knew him, yet she felt more comfortable with him than with people she had known for years in Boston. He made her laugh. He listened when she spoke. He treated her as an equal, never condescending or dismissive of her ideas. And yes, he was handsome, more than handsome. There was something compelling about the way he moved, the quiet confidence in his actions, the gentleness in his rough hands. But admitting attraction and acting on it were two different things. Josephine had come west to forge her own path, to prove she could make it on her own terms. Getting involved with a man, even one as good as Lucas seemed to be, felt like a betrayal of that independence. The next day at the schoolhouse, she found herself unusually quiet. Lucas noticed immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked as they took their midday break. "You seem distracted." "I am fine," Josephine said quickly. "Just thinking about lesson plans." Lucas did not look convinced, but he did not press. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wanted to show you something. I have been working on designs for the desks." He unfolded the paper to reveal detailed sketches. The desks were simple but clever, with attached seats and storage underneath. Lucas had even drawn in measurements and notes about the best wood to use. "These are wonderful," Josephine said, momentarily forgetting her confusion. "Very practical. I thought, if I am going to build desks, I might as well build good ones." He pointed to a detail. "See here? I am designing them to adjust as the children grow. That way, they will last longer." "You think of everything." "I try." He refolded the paper carefully. "Josephine, can I ask you something personal?" Her heart jumped. "Of course." "Do you ever regret leaving Boston? Coming out here where everything is so uncertain?" The question surprised her. "No," she said honestly. "Not for a moment. Even when I am tired or frustrated or overwhelmed, I do not regret it. This is where I am supposed to be." "I am glad," Lucas said quietly. "Black Hawk is better for having you here." Their eyes met and held. Josephine felt the now familiar flutter in her chest, the pull toward this man who had so quickly become important to her. She opened her mouth to say something, though she was not sure what, when a voice called out from outside. "Lucas! Lucas Quinn! Are you in there?" They both turned to see a young boy running toward the schoolhouse, his face flushed with exertion. Lucas immediately stood and went to meet him. "Tommy, what is wrong?" "It is my pa," the boy gasped. "There was a collapse in the mine. He is trapped." Lucas was moving before the boy finished speaking. "Where?" "The Silver Bell claim, on the North Ridge." "Get Dr. Pierce. Tell him to bring everything he has for treating injuries." Lucas was already striding toward the door. "Josephine, I have to go." "I am coming with you," she said, falling into step beside him. "It could be dangerous." "I do not care. If people are hurt, they will need help. I can assist the doctor." Lucas looked like he wanted to argue, but there was no time. "All right, but stay close to me." They hurried through town, gathering men as they went. By the time they reached the Silver Bell claim, a crowd had already assembled. Josephine could see the entrance to the mine shaft, partially blocked by fallen timber and rock. Women stood in clusters, their faces tight with fear. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Lucas immediately took charge, assessing the situation with a practiced eye. "We need to shore up the entrance before we can dig them out safely. Samuel, Marcus, get me timber from the mill. Strong pieces, at least 6 inches thick. The rest of you start clearing debris, but carefully. We do not want to trigger another collapse." Dr. Pierce arrived, his medical bag in hand. Josephine went to him immediately. "What can I do to help?" The doctor looked at her in surprise, then nodded approvingly. "Set up a treatment area over there, away from the mine. Use those blankets to create a clean space. Boil water if you can find a way. We will need to treat injuries as soon as we get them out." Josephine threw herself into the work, organizing supplies and recruiting other women to help. Martha Garrett brought bandages from the general store. Mrs. Henderson appeared with her own medical kit, explaining she had been a nurse during the war. Together, they created a makeshift field hospital. The rescue took hours. Josephine watched Lucas work with growing admiration. He was tireless, directing the men with calm authority, always the first into danger and the last to rest. When the timber arrived, he and 2 other men crawled into the partially collapsed shaft to brace the walls, despite the very real risk of another cave-in. Finally, they broke through to where the miners were trapped. 5 men emerged, coughing and covered in dust, but alive. Tommy's father was among them, his leg badly injured but otherwise intact. As each man was brought out, Dr. Pierce and his makeshift nursing staff tended to their wounds. Josephine found herself working alongside the doctor, cleaning wounds and bandaging injuries. Her hands remained steady even as her stomach churned at the sight of blood and torn flesh. These were her future students' fathers and brothers. These were members of her community, and they needed her. It was nearly dark when the last man was treated and loaded into a wagon to be taken home. The crowd slowly dispersed, exhausted and grateful that no one had died. Josephine sat on a rock, suddenly aware of how tired she was. Her dress was ruined, covered in blood and dirt. Her hair had come loose from its pins hours ago. She probably looked like something the cat dragged in, but she could not bring herself to care. Lucas appeared beside her, equally filthy and exhausted. Without a word, he sat down next to her. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the last light fade from the sky. "You were amazing today," Lucas said finally. "The way you jumped in to help, no hesitation. I did what anyone would do. No, you did not. Plenty of people freeze in a crisis. But you saw what needed to be done and did it." He turned to look at her. "You are remarkable, Josephine Sterling." In the gathering darkness, his eyes were very blue and very serious. Josephine felt something break open inside her, some wall she had been maintaining. This man, this quiet carpenter who built schoolhouses and led rescue efforts and always put others first, had found his way into her heart without her even realizing it was happening. "So are you," she whispered. Lucas reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were gentle despite the roughness of his hands. The touch sent shivers down Josephine's spine. "I should walk you back to the boarding house," he said, his voice rough. "It is getting late." They walked through the dark streets of Black Hawk, so close their shoulders almost touched. Neither spoke, but the silence felt full of possibility. When they reached Mrs. Henderson's porch, Lucas finally broke the quiet. "Josephine, I know you came here to teach, not to deal with forward minors making inappropriate advances. If I am overstepping, please tell me, and I will back away. But I need you to know that I have come to care for you a great deal. These past weeks, working alongside you, getting to know you, have been some of the best of my life." Josephine's heart pounded so hard she was certain Lucas could hear it. "You are not overstepping. I care for you too, Lucas. More than I expected to care for anyone. But I am terrified," she admitted. "I came here to prove I could stand on my own, to build a life based on my own merit. I do not want to lose myself to someone else, even someone as wonderful as you." Lucas took her hand carefully, as if she might break. "I would never ask you to lose yourself. Your independence, your passion for teaching, your strength, those are all part of what makes you who you are, part of what makes me care for you. I do not want to change you, Josephine. I just want to be part of your life, if you will let me." She looked up at him, this good man who had already given her so much without asking for anything in return. In his eyes, she saw patience and understanding, and something that looked very much like love. "I want that too," she said softly. "Very much." Lucas smiled, the expression transforming his tired face. "Then we will figure this out together. No rushing, no expectations. Just two people who enjoy each other's company." "That sounds perfect." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, an old-fashioned gesture that made her heart ache in the best way. "Good night, Josephine." "Good night, Lucas." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his figure gradually disappearing between the buildings. When she finally went inside, she found Mrs. Henderson waiting in the sitting room, a knowing smile on her face. "Do not say anything," Josephine warned, but she could not keep the happiness from her voice. "I told you love finds us when we least expect it," Mrs. Henderson said smugly. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity and emotion. By day, Josephine and Lucas continued working on the schoolhouse, which was finally nearing completion. The roof was finished, keeping out the elements. The interior walls were smooth and painted white to maximize light. The bookshelves stood empty but ready for volumes. Lucas had begun building the desks, working late into the evening by lamplight. Their relationship deepened gradually, naturally. Lucas would bring Josephine coffee in the mornings, the bitter brew sweetened just the way she liked. She would read to him sometimes as he worked, sharing passages from her favorite books. They took walks in the cool evenings, exploring the mountains around Black Hawk, talking about everything and nothing. He kissed her for the first time on a Thursday evening in late August. They had been working on hanging curtains in the schoolhouse, and Josephine had stumbled on the ladder. Lucas caught her, his strong arms keeping her from falling, and suddenly they were face to face, barely inches apart. "You should be more careful," he murmured, but made no move to set her down. "Perhaps I should," Josephine replied breathlessly. "May I kiss you?" Instead of answering, she closed the distance between them. The kiss was soft and sweet and perfect, tasting of sawdust and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," Lucas admitted. "Why did you wait?" "Because I wanted to be sure that you felt the same way, that I was not just convenient or a passing fancy. You could have anyone, Josephine. You are educated and beautiful, and so much more than this mining town probably deserves. She cupped his face in her hands. I do not want anyone else. I want you, Lucas Quinn, the man who builds things that last, the man who runs into collapsed mines to save his neighbors, the man who sees the value in teaching children even when others do not. You see more good in me than is probably there. No, she said firmly. I see you exactly as you are, and I am falling in love with that man. Lucas pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I am already in love with you, have been for weeks now, if I'm being honest. They stood there in the unfinished schoolhouse, holding each other as evening shadows stretched across the wooden floors. Outside, Black Hawk went about its business, unaware that two hearts had just declared themselves. The school opened on the first Monday of September, right on schedule. Josephine stood in front of 18 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, her heart pounding with nervousness and excitement. Lucas had finished the last desk that morning and stayed to help arrange the room. You are going to be wonderful, he told her before the students arrived. They are lucky to have you. Thank you for everything. This schoolhouse, your support, your faith in me, I could not have done this without you. You could have, Lucas said, but I am glad you did not have to. The first day went better than Josephine had dared hope. The children were curious and eager, despite their rough edges. Tommy, whose father had been injured in the mine collapse, proved to be particularly bright. Little Sarah Cooper could barely sit still, but had a gift for arithmetic. The Johnston twins were troublemakers, but responded well to firm guidance. By the time she dismissed them that afternoon, Josephine was exhausted but elated. This was what she had come west for, this sense of purpose, of making a real difference in lives that desperately needed it. Lucas was waiting outside when she emerged, leaning against the schoolhouse wall. How did it go? It was perfect, Josephine said, unable to contain her smile. Challenging and messy and absolutely perfect. I knew it would be. He offered his arm. Walk with me. I want to show you something. Curious, Josephine let him lead her away from the schoolhouse, up a winding path into the hills above town. They climbed for nearly 20 minutes before Lucas stopped at a small plateau that offered a breathtaking view of Black Hawk and the surrounding mountains. I come up here sometimes when I need to think, he explained. Helps put things in perspective. It is beautiful. Josephine turned slowly, taking in the vast landscape. The mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks touching the clouds. Below, Black Hawk looked tiny and fragile, a small human attempt at permanence in the face of nature's overwhelming scale. Josephine, there is something I want to talk to you about. Lucas took her hands in his. We have known each other for only a few weeks, but they have been the most meaningful weeks of my life. You have shown me what it means to have real purpose, real passion. You have made me want to be better, to build not just structures, but a life worth living. Her breath caught. Lucas, please let me finish. He squeezed her hands gently. I know you came here to build your own life, to prove your independence. I am not asking you to give that up. Your teaching matters. What you are doing matters, but I am hoping, perhaps foolishly, that you might consider building that life with me. Not as someone who limits you or holds you back, but as your partner, your equal. Tears pricked Josephine's eyes. Are you asking me to marry you? Eventually, if you will have me. But for now, I am just asking you to let me court you properly, to see if what we feel right now can grow into something lasting. I want to build a future with you, Josephine. Not just a house or a schoolhouse, but a real home. A life filled with purpose and meaning and love. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment, the suffocating expectations of Boston society, the long, uncertain journey west, the fear and doubt she had felt arriving in Black Hawk, and then finding Lucas, this unexpected gift, this man who understood her in ways no one else ever had. Yes, she said, the word coming out as half laugh, half sob. Yes, I want that too. All of it. Lucas pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his hope and love into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. We are going to build something amazing, he said. We already have, Josephine replied, thinking of the schoolhouse and everything it represented. As autumn settled over the Colorado mountains, Josephine and Lucas's relationship became the talk of Black Hawk. It was impossible to hide their affection in a town so small, and neither of them particularly wanted to. They were together constantly when Josephine was not teaching, working on various projects around town, or simply enjoying each other's company. Lucas began building a house on a piece of land he had purchased on the edge of town. It overlooked the valley and had a view of the schoolhouse in the distance. He worked on it in the evenings and on Sundays, and Josephine often joined him, handing him tools or helping with finishing work. "What do you think about 3 bedrooms?" Lucas asked one October afternoon as they stood looking at the half-built structure. "One for us, one for guests, and one for the future." "For children, you mean?" Josephine said, her cheeks coloring slightly. "If we are blessed with them, yes." He looked at her seriously. "Is that something you want? Because if teaching is enough for you, if you do not want children of your own, I need you to tell me now." Josephine considered the question carefully. She had never given much thought to motherhood before, too focused on her education and independence. But standing here with Lucas, imagining a life together, the idea did not seem limiting. It seemed like expansion, like more love to give rather than less freedom. "I want children," she said. "Someday. But I want to keep teaching too. Do you think that is possible? In Boston, maybe not, but out here, we make our own rules. If anyone can manage both, it is you." Lucas wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them looking at the unfinished house. "I can already see it. Children playing in the yard, you reading to them on the porch in the evenings, teaching them the same love of learning you give your students." "It sounds wonderful," Josephine admitted, leaning back against his chest. "Terrifying, but wonderful. All the best things are." As the weeks passed, the house took shape. Lucas was building it with the same care and attention to detail he had brought to the schoolhouse. Every board was carefully selected, every joint precisely fitted. He carved small flowers into the porch railings, explaining that his mother had loved wildflowers. She used to say that even rough places needed beauty, he told Josephine, that it was our responsibility to create it where we could. "She sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. I wish you could have met her. She would have loved you." One evening in November, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Lucas took Josephine to the finished house. He had been mysterious about it all week, saying he had a surprise for her. When they arrived, she found the interior transformed. Furniture had been moved in, simple but sturdy pieces that Lucas had built himself. Curtains hung in the windows. A fire crackled in the hearth, filling the space with warmth. "Lucas, it is beautiful," Josephine breathed, turning slowly to take it all in. "There is something else," he said nervously. He led her to what would be their bedroom and opened the door. Inside sat a writing desk positioned beneath the window, with a view of the mountains. Books lined shelves on the walls. A comfortable chair sat in the corner, perfect for reading. It was not just a bedroom, but a study, a private space designed for thinking and working. "I know how much your teaching means to you," Lucas said quietly. "And I know you will need space to prepare lessons, to think, to be yourself. I wanted you to have somewhere that was just yours, where you could work without interruption." Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks. The thoughtfulness of it, the understanding it represented, overwhelmed her. Lucas had not just built a house. He had built a home that honored who she was and what she needed. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" she whispered. "I think I am the lucky one." He pulled a small box from his pocket and dropped to one knee. "Josephine Sterling, I know we have not known each other long by conventional standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are my partner, my equal, my best friend, and the love of my life. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small ruby set in it. "The stone is the color of the mountains at sunset," he explained. "I wanted you to have something that reminded you of the West, of the life we are building here." "Yes," Josephine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the empty room. When he set her down, they were both dizzy and grinning. "When?" he asked. "I will wait as long as you need, but I confess I want you to be my wife as soon as possible." "Soon," Josephine agreed. "Before winter sets in fully. I do not want to wait either." They were married 3 weeks later, in the little church on the hill, with what seemed like the entire town of Black Hawk in attendance. Josephine wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her alter. Lucas wore his best suit, his sandy hair neatly trimmed, his eyes bright with happiness. Dr. Pierce officiated, and Mrs. Henderson stood up with Josephine, while Samuel Garrett stood with Lucas. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When Dr. Pierce pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in cheers. The reception was held in the schoolhouse, which seemed fitting. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing and laughter late into the evening. Josephine danced with Lucas, with Dr. Pierce, with Samuel, and several of the miners. She was passed from partner to partner, everyone wanting to congratulate the new bride. Finally, as the party wound down, Lucas spirited her away. They walked through the quiet, snow-dusted streets to their new home, Lucas carrying her over the threshold despite her laughing protests. "Tradition is tradition," he insisted, setting her down gently in the front room. The house was warm, a fire already laid in the hearth. Someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, had left a basket of food for them. Lucas lit lamps throughout the space, filling it with soft, golden light. "I cannot believe this is real," Josephine said softly, looking around the home they would share. "That I am here, married to you, starting this life." "Believe it," Lucas said, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "This is real, and it is only the beginning." That night, they came together as husband and wife, learning each other's bodies with tenderness and patience. Lucas was gentle and attentive, making sure Josephine felt loved and safe. When they finally fell asleep, tangled together in their marriage bed, both felt a peace neither had known before. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Josephine taught during the day, returning home in the evening to Lucas and the warm house he had built. He continued taking carpentry jobs around town, his reputation growing as word spread of his skill. They cooked dinner together, read by the fire, talked about their days. Winter in the mountains was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold, but their home was snug and well-built, keeping out the worst of the weather. Josephine continued teaching even when snow was waist-deep, proud that not a single day of school was missed. Lucas built her a sled so she could get to the schoolhouse more easily, and often came to meet her at the end of the day to pull her home. The children thought this was hilarious, their serious teacher being hauled through the snow like cargo. "You are ruining my dignity," Josephine told Lucas one afternoon, though she was laughing. "Your dignity will survive," he replied, grinning. "Besides, I like having an excuse to see you in the middle of the day." By February, Josephine realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts excitement and terror. She told Lucas one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "A baby?" he repeated, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are having a baby?" "Yes, probably sometime in late summer." Lucas let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around before remembering to be gentle. Sorry, I should not be throwing you around. Are you all right? Do you feel sick? What do you need?" Josephine laughed at his sudden nervousness. "I am fine, perfectly healthy, according to Dr. Pierce. You do not need to treat me like I am made of glass. But you are growing our child. That makes you the most precious thing in the world." Over the following months, as Josephine's belly grew, Lucas became almost comically protective. He insisted on walking her to and from school every day. He built her a more comfortable chair for her desk. He worried constantly that she was working too hard. "I am pregnant, not ill," Josephine reminded him regularly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, while still living their lives." "Yes, but those women were not my wife carrying my child," Lucas countered. Despite his hovering, Josephine taught up until 2 weeks before the baby was due, determined to finish the school year. The children had learned so much over the past months. Even the older ones who had been resistant at first were now reading fluently and solving complex arithmetic problems. Tommy had developed a passion for history. Sarah had conquered her restlessness and become a talented writer. On a hot August evening in 1883, Josephine went into labor. Lucas immediately panicked, racing to fetch Dr. Pierce and Mrs. Henderson, while Josephine calmly timed her contractions. By the time he returned with half the town in tow, she was sitting in the rocking chair he had built, perfectly composed. "It will be hours yet," she told the gathered crowd. "There is no need for everyone to wait." But wait they did, clustering on the porch and in the yard, unwilling to leave until they knew mother and baby were safe. It was a testament to how much the community had come to love them both. The labor was long and difficult. As the hours stretched into night, Lucas held Josephine's hand, whispering encouragement and dabbing her forehead with cool cloths. She had never felt pain like this, but she focused on Lucas's face, on the love and fear in his eyes, and found the strength to keep going. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry that made everyone on the porch cheer. Dr. Pierce laid the baby on Josephine's chest, and she and Lucas looked at their child with wonder. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You are perfect. Thank you, Josephine. Thank you for this gift." They named him William, after Lucas's father. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes, and from the moment he was born, he had both of them completely wrapped around his tiny fingers. The first weeks of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming. William was a fussy baby who did not sleep for more than an hour at a time. Josephine and Lucas took turns walking him at night, both bleary-eyed and uncertain, but determined to figure it out together. "No one tells you how hard this part is," Josephine said one night at 3 a.m. as she tried to soothe the crying infant. "Or how much you can love something so small," Lucas added, taking William from her so she could rest. "Go sleep. I have him." Slowly, they found their rhythm. William's fussiness eased as his little digestive system matured. He began to smile, then laugh, bringing joy that eclipsed the sleepless nights. Josephine stayed home from teaching that fall, wanting to be with her son during these early months, but she already missed the schoolhouse and her students. "I feel guilty," she confessed to Lucas one evening, "like I should be satisfied just being William's mother. But I miss teaching terribly." "Then teach," Lucas said simply. "We will figure it out. Perhaps Mrs. Henderson would watch William for a few hours each day, or we could bring him to the schoolhouse with you. You do not mind? You do not think it is wrong for me to want both? Josephine, I fell in love with you because of your passion for teaching. That has not changed just because we have a son. You are allowed to be both a mother and a teacher. Anyone who says otherwise can answer to me." His unconditional support brought tears to her eyes. "How did I get so fortunate to find you? I ask myself the same thing about you every single day." By January, Josephine had returned to teaching part-time. Mrs. Henderson was delighted to watch William, and the arrangement worked well. Josephine taught in the mornings, returning home at midday to nurse and spend the afternoon with her son. It was exhausting, but deeply fulfilling. Lucas continued building, his reputation now extending beyond Black Hawk. People from neighboring towns sought him out for projects. He was offered a job in Denver, a position that would pay far more than he earned locally. "What do you think?" he asked Josephine. "It is good money. We could have a bigger house, more security for William." "Do you want to leave Black Hawk?" Lucas considered the question. "No," he said finally. "This is our home. These are our people. The money would be nice, but I would rather build a good life here than a wealthy one somewhere else." "I feel the same way," Josephine said, relieved. "Black Hawk needs you. The children need me. This is where we belong." As William grew from an infant to a toddler, the Quinn household was filled with laughter and love. Lucas built their son a small wooden horse that William dragged everywhere. Josephine read to him every night, already planting seeds of curiosity and learning. In the summer of 1885, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in March of 1886, they welcomed a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Josephine's mother. She was a quieter baby than William had been, content to watch the world with solemn gray eyes. "We have quite the family now," Lucas said one evening, holding Elizabeth while William played at their feet. "Two beautiful children, successful careers, a home filled with love. We have built something real here, Josephine." "We have," she agreed, looking around at the life they had created. "Remember when we first met, when you were building the schoolhouse alone? How could I forget? You showed up in your Boston clothes, looking completely out of place, and offered to help sand wood." Josephine laughed. "I had no idea what I was doing. But you learned. That is what I love about you. You never let uncertainty stop you from trying." He shifted Elizabeth to one arm and reached for Josephine's hand with the other. "You took a chance on the West, on teaching, on me, and look what we have built together." She squeezed his hand, emotion welling up. You built more than just the schoolhouse, Lucas. You built a foundation for all of this. You gave me a place to belong, a partner who supports my dreams, a family I never knew I wanted so desperately. We built it together, he corrected gently. Every part of this life is ours, created by both of us. The years passed in a happy blur. William started school when he turned 6, sitting in his mother's classroom with the other children. Elizabeth followed a few years later, already reading before she started lessons. Josephine continued teaching, her reputation spreading beyond Black Hawk. She eventually wrote a curriculum for frontier schools that was adopted throughout Colorado. Lucas's carpentry business thrived. He hired 2 apprentices and began taking on larger projects, including a new town hall and an expansion of the church. But his favorite work remained the simple repairs and projects for neighbors, the kind of work that strengthened community bonds. In 1890, 8 years after they had first met, the town of Black Hawk decided to honor Lucas at a community dinner. Josephine sat beside him, as speaker after speaker stood to talk about what Lucas Quinn had meant to their lives, how he had built their homes and schools and businesses, how he had been there in times of crisis, how his quiet generosity had touched virtually every family in town. "I am just a carpenter," Lucas protested when it was his turn to speak, embarrassed by the attention. "I do what anyone would do." "You do far more than that," Mayor Patterson corrected. "You build with integrity. You put others first. You have made Black Hawk not just a collection of buildings, but a real community, a home." Lucas glanced at Josephine, who smiled at him with pride shining in her eyes. "I have been blessed with good work and better people," he said, "and with the best partner a man could ask for. Everything I have built has been made better by my wife's influence and support." The room erupted in applause, and Josephine felt tears on her cheeks. She thought about the frightened young woman who had arrived in Black Hawk 8 years ago, so uncertain of her place in the world. That woman felt like a stranger now. In her place was someone confident and capable, someone who knew exactly who she was and what she valued. As they walked home that night, children asleep and being carried by parents who had volunteered to help, Lucas pulled Josephine close. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about that first day when I saw you on the roof of the schoolhouse. I thought you were just building a school. I had no idea you were building my whole future." "Our future," Lucas corrected. "I could not have built any of this without you. The house, the family, the life we have. You are the foundation of everything good in my world." They reached their home, the house that Lucas had built with his own hands, and stood for a moment looking at it. Warm light spilled from the windows. Inside were their children, their books, their life together. It was not fancy or grand, but it was theirs, built with love and intention. "Thank you," Josephine said softly. "For what? For seeing me, for supporting my dreams, for building a life where I could be fully myself, for loving me exactly as I am." Lucas turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Josephine, loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. You made me want to be better, to build things that mattered. You gave purpose to all those lonely years when I was just existing, not really living. Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty carpenter in the middle of nowhere." She kissed him then, deep and sweet, pouring 8 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come on," Lucas said, taking her hand. "Let us go home." As the 1890s progressed, Black Hawk continued to grow and change. The mining industry began to decline as the easiest gold was extracted, and many families moved on to newer prospects. But a core community remained, people who had put down real roots and refused to abandon them. Josephine's school remained the heart of the town. Children who had been her first students were now young adults, some starting families of their own. Tommy had gone on to become a teacher himself in Denver. Sarah had opened a bookshop in Colorado Springs. Josephine felt profound pride seeing what her students had accomplished. Lucas continued building, though he had slowed down slightly as he entered his 40s. His joints ached on cold mornings, and he could no longer work from dawn to dusk as he once had. But his work remained exemplary, and he had trained his apprentices so well that the Quinn carpentry business was known throughout the region. William, now a teenager, showed aptitude for his father's work and often helped in the shop. Elizabeth had inherited her mother's love of books and teaching, and at 12 was already talking about becoming a teacher herself. Their home was loud and chaotic and perfect. On a spring evening in 1895, Lucas and Josephine took a walk up to the plateau where he had proposed 13 years earlier. It had become their tradition to come here on their anniversary, to look down at Black Hawk and remember how far they had come. "Look at that," Lucas said, pointing to the schoolhouse in the distance. "Still standing strong." "Thanks to its builder," Josephine said, leaning against him. "That building has educated hundreds of children now. It will probably stand for 100 years. That was always the goal, to build something that would outlast me." Josephine looked up at him sharply. "Do not talk like that. You are only 41. You have decades ahead of you." "I hope so," Lucas said. "I want to see William married, to meet our grandchildren, to grow old with you. But even if I do not, I will know I built something meaningful. This town, our family, the life we created together, that will endure." "We will endure," Josephine corrected firmly. "Together, for many more years. I refuse to consider any other outcome." Lucas smiled and kissed her forehead. "Ever the optimist. Ever the realist. I know what we have, Lucas. It is rare and precious, and I am not about to lose it." They stood there as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, Black Hawk's lights began to twinkle on as families settled in for the evening. Somewhere down there, their own children were probably getting into some kind of mischief. The thought made them both smile. "We did well, did we not?" Lucas said quietly. "We did more than well. We built exactly the life we wanted, against all odds." Josephine turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Lucas Quinn. I loved you when I first saw you on that schoolhouse roof, though I did not know it yet. I loved you when you showed me around the unfinished classroom. I loved you when you proposed to me here on this very spot. And I love you now, more than ever. I love you too, Josephine. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They kissed as the stars began to appear overhead, two people who had found each other in an unlikely place and built something extraordinary together. The turn of the century brought changes to Black Hawk. The mining industry had largely moved on, but the town had evolved. Tourism was beginning to take hold as people from Denver came to escape the summer heat in the cooler mountain air. New businesses opened to serve these visitors, and the town's economy stabilized. Lucas adapted his carpentry business, building vacation cabins and renovating the old hotel. William worked alongside him now, a skilled carpenter in his own right. They made a good team, father and son building side by side, just as Lucas and Josephine had done all those years ago. Elizabeth finished her education and, true to her childhood dreams, became a teacher. She took over more responsibilities at the school as Josephine gradually reduced her hours. At 42, Josephine found she no longer had the energy to teach full days, but she remained involved, mentoring Elizabeth and other young teachers. One afternoon, in the summer of 1902, 20 years after Josephine had first arrived in Black Hawk, she sat on the porch of their home watching Lucas and William work on a cabinet commission. Elizabeth was inside preparing lessons for the coming school year. Everything was peaceful and exactly as it should be. Mrs. Henderson, now quite elderly but still sharp as ever, came to visit. She settled into the rocking chair beside Josephine with a satisfied sigh. "Look at you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "The nervous young teacher from Boston, now a respected matron with grown children." Josephine laughed. "I hardly feel like a matron. Most days I still feel like that nervous girl, wondering if I am doing anything right. That is what makes you good at what you do. The moment you think you have all the answers is the moment you stop growing." Mrs. Henderson watched Lucas and William for a moment. "You two have built something special. I told you that first week, did I not? That love would find you when you least expected it. You did. I thought you were being ridiculous at the time. And yet, here you are, 20 years later, still making eyes at that carpenter of yours." "Guilty," Josephine admitted, not even trying to hide her smile. "Good. Never lose that. Too many couples stop seeing each other after the romance fades. But you two still look at each other like you did in the beginning. Because I still feel the same way. More, even. I understand now what we have, how rare it is. How many couples truly partner with each other, support each other's dreams, grow together instead of apart. Not many, Mrs. Henderson agreed. You chose well, child, and so did he. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Lucas and Josephine sat on their porch watching the stars. It was something they had done countless times over the years, but tonight felt different somehow, more significant. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how grateful I am for all of this, for you." Josephine gestured at the house, the town below, their life together. "I came west thinking I wanted independence and purpose, and I found those things, but I found so much more. I found a partner who makes me better, a family I adore, a community I belong to, a life filled with meaning and love." Lucas took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. "I found the same things. Before you, I was just going through the motions, building things because I knew how, not because I cared. You showed me what it meant to build with purpose, to create something meaningful. You already knew that. You were building that schoolhouse long before I arrived. I was building a structure. You helped me understand I was building a future, for the children, for the town, for us." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes still as clear and honest as they had been 20 years ago. "Every good thing in my life came from meeting you that day. You are the best thing I ever built, Josephine. This relationship, this marriage, this life together." Tears pricked Josephine's eyes. "I did not build it alone. We did it together, remember? That is what makes it so strong." "Together," Lucas agreed, pulling her close. "Always together." They sat there long into the night, wrapped in each other's arms, counting stars and blessings in equal measure. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1905, and the whole town mourned the loss of one of its founding mothers. Dr. Pierce followed a year later, leaving a void in the community that was hard to fill, but life also brought celebrations. William married a lovely young woman named Catherine in 1907, and they gave Lucas and Josephine their first grandchild, a boy named Lucas, after his grandfather in 1908. The joy of holding that baby, of seeing their legacy continue, moved both of them to tears. Elizabeth married a teacher from Denver named Robert in 1909, and they settled in Black Hawk, both teaching at the school. Josephine officially retired that year, turning over the school completely to the next generation. She found retirement both liberating and strange, suddenly having time she did not know how to fill. "We should travel," Lucas suggested one evening. They were in their 50s now, still healthy and active, but increasingly aware of time's passage. "See some of the country we have never explored." Leave Black Hawk? The idea felt both exciting and terrifying. "Not permanently, just for a few months. We could visit my sister in St. Louis, see San Francisco. Maybe even go back to Boston so you can show me where you came from." The trip took 6 months, and it was glorious. They saw cities and landscapes they had only read about. Josephine reunited with her sister in Boston, introducing Lucas to what remained of her family. He charmed them all, this quiet carpenter from the mountains, who had won their daughter's heart. But, as wonderful as the journey was, both felt profound relief when they finally returned to Black Hawk. This was home. These mountains, this town, these people. Everything else was just visiting. "I missed the schoolhouse," Josephine confessed as they unpacked. "Is that strange? It has been years since I taught there regularly, but I miss seeing it every day." "It is not strange at all," Lucas said. "That building is part of our story, part of our hearts. Of course you missed it." In 1915, on the 33rd anniversary of their first meeting, Lucas and Josephine made another pilgrimage to their special plateau. It was harder now to make the climb, their bodies not as strong as they once were, but they persevered. The view was worth it, as it always had been. 33 years, Josephine marveled, looking down at Black Hawk. "We have been together longer than we were apart." "Best 33 years of my life," Lucas said. "Though I confess, I thought we would have more time. I thought we would grow old together." Something in his voice made Josephine turn sharply. "What do you mean? We are growing old together." Lucas smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Josephine, I need to tell you something. I went to see a doctor in Denver while we were traveling. I have been having some pain, some trouble breathing. He said my heart is failing." The world seemed to tilt. "What? No, that cannot be right. You are fine, you are strong and healthy, and I am 61 years old, and I have worked hard my entire life. My body is tired, love. The doctor said I might have a year, maybe 2 if I am lucky." Josephine felt like she could not breathe. "No, I refuse to accept that. We will get a second opinion. We will find treatment. You cannot leave me, Lucas. You cannot." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as she shook with sobs. "I do not want to leave you. I want to stay with you forever. But we do not always get what we want. All we can do is make the most of the time we have." "How long have you known?" "A few months. I did not want to ruin our trip. I wanted to give you those memories, unshadowed by this." "You should have told me," Josephine said, pulling back to look at him. "We are partners, Lucas. We face things together." "You are right. I am sorry. I was being selfish, wanting to pretend for a little longer that everything was fine." They sat down on the ground, holding each other as the sun moved across the sky. Finally, Josephine spoke. "Then we will make the most of every day. No more secrets, no more pretending. We will face this together, just like we have faced everything else." "Together," Lucas agreed. The next year was both the best and worst of Josephine's life. She and Lucas spent every possible moment together, taking walks, sitting on their porch, visiting their children and grandchildren. They talked about everything, sharing memories and dreams and regrets. Lucas continued working as long as he was able, determined to finish one last project. A new wing for the schoolhouse. Elizabeth had taken over as head teacher, and enrollment was growing. The building needed to expand. "Let me help," William protested when Lucas insisted on working despite his failing health. "You should be resting." "I will have plenty of time to rest soon enough," Lucas replied. "Let me finish this. Let me end where I began, building something for the children." Josephine understood. The schoolhouse had brought them together. It was fitting that Lucas's final project would be connected to it, completing a circle that had begun 34 years earlier. By spring of 1916, Lucas was too weak to work. He spent most of his time in the chair by the window, looking out at the mountains he loved. Josephine sat with him constantly, reading aloud or simply holding his hand. "I am not afraid," he told her one evening. "I have had a good life, a meaningful life. I got to build things that mattered. I got to love you and be loved by you. I got to see our children grow into wonderful adults. What more could a man ask for?" "More time," Josephine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I want more time with you." "I want that too. But we have had 34 years, love. 34 years of building a life together. That is more than many people get." "It is not enough. It will never be enough." Lucas reached up to cup her face, his hand trembling with the effort. "Listen to me. When I am gone, I do not want you to stop living. Keep teaching if you want, or travel, or whatever makes you happy. But do not let grief consume you. Promise me." "I cannot promise that. I do not know how to exist without you." "You are the strongest person I know, Josephine Quinn. You came west alone, built a life from nothing, raised children, educated hundreds of students. You will survive this. You will more than survive. You will continue to build beautiful things, even without me. How can you be so calm about this?" "Because I have no regrets. I lived the life I wanted, with the woman I loved. I built things that will endure long after I am gone. The schoolhouse will stand for generations. Our children will carry on our values. And you, my brilliant, beautiful wife, you will keep changing lives and making the world better. That is immortality enough for me." Lucas Quinn died on a warm June evening in 1916, with Josephine holding his hand and their children gathered around. His last words were, "I love you. Thank you for the life we built." The grief nearly destroyed Josephine. For weeks she could barely function. She sat in Lucas's chair by the window, staring at nothing, unable to imagine a future without him. William and Elizabeth took turns staying with her, making sure she ate and slept. But they could not reach the place where her sorrow lived. It was the schoolhouse that finally pulled her back. A month after Lucas's death, Elizabeth came to her with a problem. One of the desks Lucas had built all those years ago had finally broken beyond repair. They needed to replace it, but they wanted it to match the others. "I need the original plans," Elizabeth explained. "Father kept drawings of everything he built. Do you know where they might be?" Josephine stirred from her fog of grief. "In his workshop, in the cabinet by the window. Would you come help me look? I am not sure I would recognize the right plans." It was clearly a ploy to get Josephine out of the house, but she went anyway. Stepping into Lucas's workshop was like stepping into the past. His tools still hung on the wall where he had left them. Half-finished projects sat on the workbench. The smell of sawdust and wood oil filled the air, so distinctly, Lucas, that Josephine's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself to search through the cabinet, pulling out roll after roll of plans. There were drawings for their house, for buildings all over town, for countless pieces of furniture. And there, finally, were the desk plans, complete with measurements and notes in Lucas's careful handwriting. As Elizabeth took the plans, Josephine continued looking through the cabinet. At the very back, she found something wrapped in oilcloth. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a leather-bound journal. She opened it to the first page and saw Lucas's handwriting. For Josephine, to read after I am gone. With shaking hands, she carried the journal back to the house. That night, alone in their bed, she began to read. Lucas had documented their life together, but not as a simple chronology. Instead, he had written about moments that mattered, the first time he saw her, their first kiss, the day they married, the births of their children, ordinary days made extraordinary by love. But more than that, he had written about what Josephine had meant to him, how she had transformed his life from mere existence into something rich and meaningful, how her courage and intelligence and compassion had made him want to be better, how loving her had been the greatest privilege of his life. You will read this when I am gone, he wrote on the final page, and you will be drowning in grief. I know, because I would be the same if I had to live without you. But Josephine, my brilliant, strong wife, you must not let sorrow consume you. You have too much to give, too much left to build. I built structures that will stand for years, but you build human souls. The children you taught, the lives you touched, that is your legacy. Do not abandon it now. Keep building, keep growing, keep living. Do it for me. Do it for our children. But most of all, do it for yourself, because you deserve a life filled with purpose and joy, even without me. I love you. I will always love you. But I need you to keep going, to keep building beautiful things in this world. That is how you honor what we had. That is how you keep me alive. Build, my love. Keep building. Josephine clutched the journal to her chest and wept, but this time the tears felt different, cleansing rather than destructive. Lucas was right. She had built a life of meaning with him, but that life was not over just because he was gone. She still had children to love, grandchildren to watch grow, students to teach if she chose. She still had purposes to fulfill. The next morning, Josephine got dressed properly for the first time in a month. She walked to the schoolhouse and stood looking at it, this building that had started everything. It was showing its age now, 34 years after Lucas had begun construction, but it was still standing strong, still fulfilling its purpose. Elizabeth found her there. "Mama, are you all right?" "I am," Josephine said, and meant it. "I will always miss your father, but he is right. I cannot stop living just because he is gone. There is still work to do." "What kind of work?" Josephine turned to her daughter with the first real smile she had managed since Lucas's death. "The wing your father was building when he got too sick to continue. We need to finish it, and I want to help." Over the next months, Josephine threw herself into completing Lucas's final project. She could not do the heavy carpentry, but she could sand and paint and organize. William did the skilled work, following his father's plans exactly. By the time school started in September, the new wing was complete. At the dedication ceremony, Josephine stood before the gathered townspeople and spoke about Lucas, about his vision and skill and generosity, about the life they had built together, about the legacy he had left not just in buildings, but in the lives he had touched. "My husband once told me that he wanted to build things that would endure," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion. "He succeeded beyond measure. This schoolhouse has educated hundreds of children over 34 years, and it will educate hundreds more. But more than that, Lucas taught us all what it means to live with purpose, to build with intention, to give more than you take. That is his real legacy, and it lives on in every person he helped, every life he touched, every structure he built. He may be gone, but what he created endures." Life gradually found a new normal. Josephine moved forward, carrying her grief, but not letting it define her. She volunteered at the school, mentoring young teachers. She spent time with her grandchildren, passing on the stories of their grandfather. She took up painting, discovering a talent she had never known she had. On the anniversary of Lucas's death, she made the difficult climb to their plateau one more time. It took her hours, and she had to rest frequently, but she was determined. From that familiar vantage point, she looked down at Black Hawk and thought about everything she and Lucas had built together. The schoolhouse stood proud and strong, a beacon of learning. Their house remained a warm and welcoming home. Their children were happy and successful, raising families of their own. All around town were buildings Lucas had constructed, structures that would stand for generations. But more than the physical things, they had built something intangible but infinitely more valuable. They had built a partnership based on mutual respect and support. They had built a family rooted in love and purpose. They had built a life that mattered, that had made a difference in the world. "We did it," Josephine said aloud, speaking to Lucas though he was gone. "We built something beautiful and lasting. Thank you for sharing your life with me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for showing me what was possible." The wind whispered through the pine trees, and Josephine chose to believe it was Lucas answering her. She stood there until the sun began to set, then carefully made her way back down the mountain. She had a painting class to attend, grandchildren to visit, a life to keep living. Because that was what you did when you loved someone. You honored them by continuing to build, to grow, to find meaning and joy. Lucas had taught her that, among so many other things. And she would spend the rest of her days living that lesson, building beautiful things in his memory and her own right. Years later, when Josephine was an old woman in her 80s, she would sit on her porch and tell her great-grandchildren about the day she arrived in Black Hawk and saw a cowboy repairing a roof alone. She would tell them how that moment had changed her life, how that man had become the greatest love she ever knew. "He was building a schoolhouse," she would explain, "but he was really building our future, mine, his, all of yours. Because everything good in my life came from meeting him that day. You children, your parents, this whole beautiful life. It all started with a man who knew how to build things that lasted." Josephine Quinn lived to be 89 years old, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. When she passed peacefully in her sleep in 1948, the whole town mourned the loss of their beloved teacher. She was buried next to Lucas on a hillside overlooking Black Hawk, their headstones bearing the simple inscription, "Together, they built a life of meaning." The schoolhouse they had both devoted themselves to stood for another 50 years before finally being replaced by a more modern structure. But the original desks Lucas had built were preserved, displayed in the town museum as a testament to his craftsmanship. And the story of the Boston teacher and the Colorado carpenter who fell in love while building a schoolhouse became local legend, passed down through generations as an example of what true partnership looked like. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived in Black Hawk, carrying on the values of hard work, community service, and building things that mattered. The house Lucas built with such care remained in the family, lovingly maintained and cherished. And every year on the anniversary of that day in August 1882, when Josephine first saw Lucas on that roof, someone from the family would make the climb to the plateau and look down at the town, remembering the legacy of two people who had found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary together. Because Lucas had been right all those years ago. He was not just building a schoolhouse, he was building something far more important. A foundation for love, for family, for a life filled with purpose and meaning. And that foundation proved stronger and more enduring than any structure could ever be. It lived on in the lives they had touched, the family they had raised, and the example they had set. They had built more than shelter. They had built a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come.